Hello and welcome to another daily devotion. As this season of Advent, we go through what I call affectionately the R's. Not hope, peace, joy, and love, and as are symbolized by the Advent candles, but remember, rejoice, revive, and I forget what our fourth one is, but I get there. And today's and this week's topic is remember. The people of Israel had a tradition that started, I believe, with the patriarch Jacob. If you remember the story, he sees the stairway to heaven, on a stairway to heaven, and he puts his head on a rock, and he sees the angels of God ascending and descending into heaven, and he says, surely the Lord's presence is in this place. And after he has this encounter with God, and God speaks to him and shares with him now the promise of what earlier in the narrative had been, the God of my father Isaac and his father Abraham now becomes Jacob's God, as Jacob has this experience with the divine. And so he builds a little altar or rock pile to remember that this is where I met God. And you see this happening throughout the scriptures, whether it's Joshua, as the people cross from all this time in the wilderness and the Exodus journey. They cross the Jordan east into western Israel, and the land of God's promise is finally realized. And Joshua says, let's each tribe take a stone, and we'll build an altar to God so we remember this is the day that God made good on God's promises. So when I was in Israel with our church group, and we had gone to the house of Peter, and to the place of Peter's denial, and the courtyard there outside the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. And as we're remembering this story, honest to goodness, as we're reading the story about Peter and seeing the trial and the rooster crowing, we had a cock crow twice. As we're hearing this story, as we're in the Garden of Peter, it's like almost somebody said, cue the rooster. But anyway, our guide said he had a surprise for us. So he took us up past the house of Caiaphas, up the hillside on Mount Zion to a cemetery. And as he took us to this grave. They were all above ground. And on the grave, there were rocks, hundreds, if not thousands of rocks. And he said, this is the tomb of Oskar Schindler. From Schindler's List, you may have seen. But, a German, actually a Czech manufacturist who saved, he and his wife, 1,200 Jewish workers from their deaths in Krakow, Poland. And he said, these stones are from Schindler's Jewish survivors, the families and the gratitude who come to visit his grave. And though he's not a Jew, he's born in this Jewish cemetery. I'm sorry, not born, buried in this Jewish cemetery, because we remember what God did through this man to deliver us from the hands of the Holocaust. And so as I think about remembrance, I also come to this place where I took kids from youth group up to this camp in Virginia called Wilderness Trail. And at the camp, they would say in the night, just before we were about to take a 50-mile hike into the wilderness on the Appalachian Trail, they said, we want each of you to pick up a stone, however big or small, and carry it up the mountain, which we did. And as we got there, they told us to put the stones underneath this cross. And it was overlooking the whole valley, one of the tallest mountains in this southwest corner of Virginia. And each stone of this altar that had been made was from a camper who had been there before us. The camp had been going almost 18 years by the time I took my last trip up there. And it was just powerful to see as we took communion in this valley of God's sanctuary that was just, a creation around us on the mountaintop. All these stones reminding us that we were never alone. So as we begin this Advent journey of preparation, the first word we'd like to focus on is remember. Remember what God has taken you through as we celebrate the birth of Jesus. Don't forget who God has been to you already. I hope you have some fond memories of ways God has acted in your life as you prepare for this Advent season.